All right, ladies and gentlemen, a few minutes late today, but we are on another edition of the MSP Initiative, back from the road, from the Channel Strong Tour 2.0. We have a familiar face back to MSP Initiative. If full disclosure, we started MSP Initiative back in March of this year, and Alec Stanners here now with Tiger Paw Software was our MC at the time. And then welcome him back as a guest on the show. Alec, welcome back, my friend.
Appreciate you inviting me and happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been some time. For those of you who don't know Alec, I'm going to give him an opportunity, like we do with all of our guests, to kind of walk down memory lane. Alec's been in the industry for a bit. Alec, why don't you go ahead and give people kind of a professional history lesson on Alec Stanners so that they understand where you come from and why you do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started my career way back at a bar, got my first taste of the space, and then really officially jumped in working at Autotask for 5.5 years. Spent some time at Datto and eventually worked at bvoip for a number of years. Everything from marketing to business development on that side. Mix in my background of marketing and sales. Finally up to my spot today is VP of Sales Marketing at Tiger Paw. And it's been a great ride and definitely enjoyed the bvoip times and a lot of miles, a lot of partners, and yeah, definitely been a fun history.
Awesome. So, you're based out of New York. I think that's been one of the states that's been more, tight on how things are going, right? But you do talk with MSPs from around the world. So I'd love to get your idea of kind of how things are going, right? Not just from maybe we start off with how things are going from just how, the ebb and flow of COVID, whatever. But I'd also like to talk about how things are going now that the industry continues to shrink, crunch. There's little guys that pop up. There's big guys that come in and swoop in. Like the landscape seems to have changed again a little bit.
Yeah, so a couple things on that. First one, New York is definitely one of the stricter states. I have been prohibited from traveling anywhere besides, I believe, literally the West Coast without a 2-week mandatory quarantine on the way back, which is less than fun in terms of a visiting partner standpoint, or even going out to Omaha, Nebraska, where the office is. But from a generalized partner standpoint, I've seen some really interesting trends I haven't really seen in the past. We've watched a lot of MSPs over the years expand out their offerings. Generally, cybersecurity is the one that we've seen a million times. There's been a couple others throughout the years, but it hasn't really branched out widely. What I've seen over the last, let's call it 6 months, are partners picking up new services constantly to meet the needs of the market, which is really cool to watch them evolve. So I have MSPs that I'm now watching do managed security, whether it's physical security on site. I'm watching a lot of MSPs starting to offer managed print offerings. Even if it's a small home printer for the CEO and they're sending ink and scheduling those. I've kind of seen a branch into even some really different stuff. We saw a locksmithing company reach out, actually. So there's been some weird ones out there that definitely are branching out and expanding more of their offerings. And that, I think, is just a response to the market. People are working from home more. You're dealing with less offices. Offices are in, they're out. It's dependent on the month. So,
well, on the one point that you just mentioned, right? I mean, now all these home automation things are popping up, right? Whether it's the Nest thermostat, whether it's the Ring security and kind of like the drone and the cameras, and then you got the front doorbell thing. Like all of a sudden these traditional home-ish type services are now forced into technology land, right? Like you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, you pick up the the digital kind of open up the lock with your Bluetooth on your phone, and now they can have somebody come install that for you. Does that person know enough to be dangerous? I guess, if they're charging you to come install it. But yeah, all of a sudden, like we've traditionally said that the 4 or 5 services that have kind of like the roads have kind of merged together, right? The physical security, right? Door access control, stuff like that. We talked about point of sale, right? That's one. talked about printer, that was another. We talked about phone guys, that was another. And then you talked about IT guys, right? We've largely said those guys were all converging at some realm, right? Now you got these home services guys that are also kind of getting pushed into the equation a little bit. So it's interesting that you say that.
It's funny. The other one that we've seen a ton of are MSPs that are running large scale projects. A lot of the CEOs of businesses that they support all wanted a huge home theater. Through this whole thing, it was like, if I'm going to be stuck at home, I'm at least going to enjoy watching some TV. So I've seen tons of MSPs reaching out about different integrations, things like that, for them to tie in the AV side of the world.
I totally forgot about the AV guys. Yeah, like the control for whole house automation,
Oh
like
yeah,
kind of AV type stuff. I'm lucky, right? Like my movie theater was open for a while. I was going down there by myself, watching the theater, and it's only one in there in the back. But now it's kind of closed again. So the home theater thing is pretty popular, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. Are you seeing similar from bvoip partners? Seeing a lot of expansion into other areas, or?
I think that, and we've heard it a lot here, right? That project revenue has largely gone down, but reoccurring services are largely stable. I think what's happened is, as everyone's been sitting trying to either retool their team, learn new skills, learn new offerings, stuff that largely managed services companies have strayed away from, right? Because it was too far off the beaten path to be something that can be standardized on. They've taken a flyer on, right? So, stuff that, before they're like, nope, not doing it, not touching it. Now all of a sudden they're like, hey, I'll do it, because we got nothing else going on, right? Like there are people that kind of already do those things, right? That aren't necessarily totally in IT space, but like there's that fence, right? That everybody has to jump over from time to time. So at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, I think it's not anything goes, but if it's reasonable, they'll do it, or they'll partner up with somebody who does, and maybe like go down, there's a lot more home-based stuff, right? Because everybody's been working from home.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it'd be interesting to see what sticks, right? Like going into next year. I know the word IoT has been abused 1,000 ways over, but I mean, all these things that you plug into your home network, right? And like the 30 devices on average per household now, where before it was like 10. Yeah, it's happening for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would agree with you on the project versus recurring basis. I feel like a lot of that stayed stable. The only area we saw it drop off was, and it's funny because for years we preached the opposite, right? We told MSPs specialize, find that one industry, be that expert and own it. And some people did extremely well with it. And the funny thing is, some people did extremely well through this with it. But obviously, we all know that there's some industries that will really hit harder than others. For instance, we have an MSP that specializes in rock quarries. Completely weird one, but there's a ton of technology there, from access points, everything else that they run through it to keep all the systems going. There's a lot of technology, and they actually stopped production entirely at a point in many states. So we had an MSP that was really excited, was working along, and had to completely stop and almost stop their business. Put a pause for about 30, 60 days until they could reassess. And so that's one of the ones we've seen a little bit of, but I'd say the ones who were very diversified, it kind of took a little bit of everything, seemed to do pretty stable. And obviously the ones that have industries.
That's the one, like, get it. Pandemic comes once every 100 years.
Yeah.
I like, if we go back to 2019, the story still holds, right? But the guys who did verticalize, if they were the ones that were in the bad end of the stick here on this whole pandemic thing, they got crushed, right? And then the generalists, right, that kind of dealt with a lot of different people in a lot of different areas, they seem to do okay because they didn't have all their eggs in one basket. But like, how do you predict this, right? So I'm curious to see moving forward, because you just don't know when the next shoe drops. Not that we're expecting the next COVID, 2022. How many of these companies decide to maybe not concentrate totally on one or two verticals and go back to more of a stretch approach? I don't know. Almost like you're hedging your bets.
No, and that's the thing. You can't ever predict this. It may never happen again. It may happen again 100 years, 1,000 years, 10 years. No one will ever know, and no one can ever predict that. I think you have to think of the broader good, right? The ones who did specialize, you rewind the clock 8 months, and the ones who did specialize, they were out there and they were doing just fine, and they were growing because they were out there as that expert, and they got more press and they got more attention. So that's a really hard road to go down because you just don't know what it'll be in the future. I think you have to figure out ways to protect yourself and ways to have that fallback plan of either you're able to quickly spin the gears and go the other direction, or you have other work that you can fall back on, or you get a pocket of customers that are outside of that space. Whatever you need to do to protect yourself, I think that has to be part of that disaster preparedness plan that everyone has for their businesses.
Yeah, now that we've gone through 2 tours of traveling around America, we're starting to see, like, it's clear that MSPs are starting to strategically partner, right? Maybe not merge, maybe not, combine, but hey, you're really good at AV. Hey, you're really good at, retail. Hey, you're like, and what they're doing is they're co-opetition, I guess is the right word, right? They're working together to kind of move business around for everyone until, kind of the road straightens out a bit, which is, hey, that's not a bad way to do things, especially when you're trying to reinvent something on the fly. Obviously, everybody wants to have the rules drawn out very clearly and make sure everybody's on the up and up. But, if they can figure it out, and it looks like many have, um, they're finding a way through, right? They're getting creative like a lot of people are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things that I've seen in that is a lot of gentlemen's agreements around just kind of borders. So let's say you're in New York, you're not going to travel outside of Manhattan to get up to White Plains or areas like that because we know it's a pain to get in and out of the city. Most people don't even have a car. If you do, it's still a pain to get in and out. So a lot of people are partnering with people just outside of those major metros or just outside of what they consider their service area, and just kind of have that gentleman's agreement of, yeah, I'll grow this way, but I won't grow this way anymore. We'll draw a line here, and anything that comes in north of that, east of that, I'm gonna hand it over to you, and west of that for you, you hand it over to me. So I've seen a lot of that popping up in the partners I've spoken with, and one of the weirder ones, and actually I believe they're a bvoip partner. I just talked to somebody who had partnered up with one of the major TV brands and actually was running as a point person to repair all the TVs. I mean, people are getting creative and they're doing well with it. And you just got to tap into what else is out there. What other forms of revenue can you get? Is it project work for big companies? Is it more outside of the norm, right? We all want that recurring revenue. We all want that managed contract, but if that's not possible right now, people aren't willing to sign that over right now. What else is out there?
For sure. So Darren, good friend of the show, out of San Diego, says, in my case, having diversified clients plus having residential tech has been an absolute godsend this year. Darren, I hear you, man. And quite frankly, I'm hearing that from a lot of people. And 12 months ago, when you would say, hey, would you go and do residential work? Everybody would be like, stay away. Now I don't think you can say that, right? I think you got to figure out how far you're willing to go. Like, do you want to play with the PlayStation and the Xbox for the kids, or, are you just worrying about, wireless and cabling and router, or like how deep into the home, the home stuff are you going to go into? But yeah, I mean, everybody has to figure that out. And I know you've largely been doing that this entire time, right? Even before the pandemic, which is great, right? You've specialized in that kind of high end stuff. I know, but to be fair, Darren, for somebody to get into some of the high end stuff, it's a learning curve, right? Like they're not going to pick it up overnight and they're not going to do it right maybe the first time. So everybody needs to understand that maybe they got to learn from somebody else rather than, having to constantly go back to somebody's place to fix something is my guess. But all that being said, I mean, the title of this session that I came up with right before I pressed the go button was the MSP space is full of tools. Have you really examined your options lately? With Alec Stanners from Tiger Paw. So here we are. Before we go down that road, I mean, Alec, it's very interesting that you've kind of been on both ends of the spectrum a little bit, right? You said you work with Autotask. This was pre-Datto days, right? And then you worked with Datto, again, pre-merger of Autotask and Datto. And then they merged. And now that company has since just gone public. I'd love to get your two cents on that. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously we've seen it before. SolarWinds went public, 2 years ago now. So it's an interesting move. It's either going to shine a huge flashlight on our space, and we're going to see a lot more attention, which we've been seeing, right? Private equity is no stranger to our space, and that's been growing, seems year over year for at least the last 5 years or so. So I would say either we're going to see a indefinite increase in that, or things will stay the same. SolarWinds happened, and they obviously acquired new tools, but I don't think they were the Tesla stock. I don't think all of a sudden overnight they were rising up $300, $500, $600 a share. But they've done well. They've held steady, and they've acquired some new cool tools. They acquired Passportal and some other things like that. But it's so hard to tell. Well, once you go public, it could go north, could go south. You just never really know. You're kind of at the hands of the market and then the economy and wildfires and everything else that goes on in the world could turn that around for you.
So, again, no proprietary information or anything, just asking, gut feel. Do you feel like the space will have more innovation because of the money coming in from the top end? Or do you feel like it's got to require pop-ups and startups to come in to make that happen rather than the people who now have all of this money behind them?
One of the reasons I actually went to work for bvoip was it wasn't that 1,000-person company. And I love that about it because we were able to be innovative, but I believe that the innovation that came from bvoip comes from the nimble nature of it. And that comes with a smaller team. When you get bigger and larger and there's more managers, more bosses and board and private equity and everyone else to answer to, it gets harder and harder in terms of approvals and split decisions and things like that. And some of those split decisions can absolutely hurt you, but some of them can absolutely be the next big thing. I don't see a private equity company okaying renting a 5-story yacht for a party at a conference. I just don't see it happening because for them it's gonna be very hard to justify
that will always live. I get you. I guess is part of, like, we've heard of SolarWinds now maybe taking their MSP division and breaking that into a completely separate entity. Same shareholder kind of value, right? But just gives them more flexibility. I assume this is the case because the people at the top are looking to do more acquisitions for their innovation strategy rather than something they're building internally. Does that mean everyone's now standing in line waiting for their chance to get acquired, or is that not also a good strategy for companies that aren't in that stage?
I think it depends. Acquisitions are great. We're seeing it at the vendor level. We're seeing it a ton at the MSP level. And MSP level is funny because we're actually seeing more and more private equity grow in that space too and create these super MSPs. And, I think there's a time and a place for everything, for the business owners out there, especially the ones that maybe aren't having the year that they wanted to have and are considering that quick out. Really look at it. COVID's not going to last forever. Is it too early? Are you making, what you put into it? You put time, blood, sweat, tears, family time, all of it on the table to make this happen and grow this business. Are you getting what it's actually worth? And if you struggle a little bit more and you hold on a little bit more, will it be worth it at the end of the road? And I think it very much could be. So that's one of the biggest things I'd say out there to people. But, from an overall standpoint, yeah, I think private equity is coming in heavy. I think it's coming in heavier than it ever has. I think that a lot of people know the blueprint for private equities. I think it can be really exciting. I think you can get a lot of money to do some really cool things. I just hope that they never lose touch with their partners. That's the biggest one that I think happens and has happened in the past. If you hold that relationship tight with your partners and you understand what their needs are, you can keep developing that. You can keep acquiring tools to help that happen. But don't lose sight of that, because as soon as you do that, you're just doing it for the dollars. You're just doing it for the shareholders, and that's not a good road to go down for anybody.
No, it's good advice. I appreciate your feedback on that, and you bring a unique view, right? Just because you've been around a few places and have seen what it looks like behind the scenes, right? So this year's been a time where everyone's had a chance to kind of zoom back, look at their expenses, figure out what they're paying for, determine whether they're getting value from their tools. I've said it 1,000 times. I'll say it 1,001 times now. It's former conference swiper fatigue. Like you roll down the aisle, you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden you have 5 tools, 10 tools that you never implemented. 6 months later, you're like, I guess I'm not using these. Obviously, we've not had that opportunity this year. Which good and bad, right? But generally speaking, everyone has really started to take a look at, hey, am I missing stuff from my stack? Should I be reevaluating my stack? My contract's coming up. Should I really be reconsidering? There's that double-edged sword in the space, right? Where you're like, if you don't, give if you don't actually read the agreement and find out that you need to give your notice in on like 91 days before the renewal, auto renewal. So that happens a lot. Um, what's changed in the last 18, 24 months on the tools, right? Like, I feel like generally speaking, the big four have been around for a while. We know who they are. Generally speaking, we've seen people come up that, to start new things, right? To either restart that whole conversation from scratch or try and enhance the experience of the big guys, because in some cases it's not very good. Um, and obviously security is obviously a burgeoning conversation. We know that that's only going up in things to look at, because it's now starting to become actually quasi affordable, where even a couple of years ago it was just not even close to small business budgets. So like, what from your seat, from your view, where do things stand right now? What are you hearing? What's your positioning for somebody who is now starting to zoom back and saying, what do I need to add? What don't I need to add? What do I need to swap out? What should I look for? I mean, it's not all equal, right? There's a lot of effort depending on which piece you're looking at.
Yeah, so you hit on some good ones there, right? I overbought. I went to a conference. I had some drinks with those guys. I really enjoyed their booth, whatever it was, and I overbought. Very common. What we're seeing today is a huge shift in the market thought. While our industry was kind of bubbled from this, from COVID as a whole. Yes, we talked about the subset of industries that were really affected that MSP supported, and those MSPs are hurting because of that, upward effect. But if you zoom out, as a whole, our industry has been pretty bubbled. It's been pretty protected. Like you said, most of the MRR has been pretty stable, but people are still preparing. They don't know what 3 months, 6 months, 12 months looks like from an economy standpoint, from everything else. So a lot of them are protecting themselves, and they might be looking at hard costs. I'm hearing about MSPs that are getting rid of their offices entirely,
Mm-hmm.
doing a full-time work from home. That seems to be becoming more common, and that's a huge hard cost. That's an every month cost they're getting rid of. There's a lot of other areas like that. And I think one of the things we're watching quite a bit is the look at their tool set. Am I overpaying? And like you talked about, are there things I should have and I don't? That's definitely one that we see a lot. But the bigger one, I think, is, am I overpaying? And a lot of times you got in the door because the main tool did X, Y, Z, but you also needed billing, you also needed inventory, you also needed password management, all these different areas that down the road became a need, and you just added and added and added, and all of a sudden you're sitting on a tool stack of 36, 40 tools, and everything's an add-on, and it's piles up, and all of a sudden that monthly bill from that vendor that you thought originally, okay, I'm going to sign on, it'll be $80, $100 a user. When I add up all the add-ons and tools, I'm paying 140, 150, 160 a user to that vendor. That's one thing we're seeing quite a bit is people reevaluating. We're getting a lot of traction off of that, and a lot of people are talking to us and working with us for that reason. One of the unique approaches we took was not trying to build out additional add-ons, not trying to build out different tools. And for that reason, we added in things like a password manager, or we added in a really strong billing and quoting platform. So allowing you to do all the quoting, the procurement, using tools like Utilize baked in that normally you pay $50, $90 for a tool to do that. So that's probably one of the biggest shifts I've watched through COVID is a lot more of that cost cutting, but in a preemptive way, not a business is going away, just we're going to be here in 12, 18 months and we're going to do it because we protect ourselves. So,
I mean, there's something to be said for, depending on, like ripping out an accounting system and putting a new one in is not easy. Okay. Nope. Ripping out a PSA and putting a new one in is not easy. Ripping out an RMM is still hard, but maybe not as hard, right? And then you start talking about password managers, you start talking about antivirus, and you start talking about second opinion scanners, malware, email protection, stuff that plugs into M365, right? I mean, how much barrier is too much, right? Where is there a fine line, where there's enough? Where does the pain point need to be in order to pull the trigger?
Honestly, I feel that changes by the day. Everyone's got a different opinion on that. What pains you, the next guy might find a casual annoyance. And, because of that reason, There are different pain points to that. There's tools out there that I've seen that I think are incredible tools. And personally, for me, I'm like, wow, that solves a huge issue. But I might never ever talk to a single person that uses it. And that happens. That absolutely happens. Sometimes it's lack of marketing, it's lack of product awareness. But yeah, I think that unfortunately that's perceptive. It's definitely down to the eye of the beholder and what they see as an issue and what they see as a driver for that. Some pain points like you hit on, yeah, accounting systems, if that's broken, that's a pain point no one's gonna deal with. If I can't bill or get money in, yeah, we got a major problem here. But if it's, fixing, grammar on internal tickets, we'll live. We can decipher Bob and get through his crazy tickets and figure out enough of what's going on to keep moving.
Oh, fair enough. Good friend Becky here comes in and says, as you have seen MSPs evaluating their tool sets, what resources are they using to find new options? I assume a lot of Googling, but
Yeah.
what are you seeing, Alec?
I heard a funny one the other day, G2, which I hadn't heard in a long time. But it seems some people are still using that. Pop my head in there, and does seem still pretty active on a lot of the tools in our space. So that one surprised me. I see a lot more social interaction. I see for the age old, if I had a dollar, statement of what's everyone using for VoIP? What's everyone using for, insert MSP tool here, access points, backup, whatever it is. Facebook, Reddit, all of those are pretty active in that space. But there's, I think it's a double-edged sword for the vendors. You're going to get the good, you're going to get the bad, you're going to get the ugly. So it's a good time to understand that that's the buying pattern these days, and make sure your partner's happy. Make sure you're taking good care of them.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, one of the big things that we're hearing and have heard for a long time is, access to support. Or the person who sold the tool, are they just dumping and running? Like they need, if they need to get a hold of someone, how difficult is it? I mean, I assume that there's a multi-checklist of evaluating vendors. Obviously, the vendor security is probably a big topic these days, and support's a big one. What other check boxes are important, like top 5 type thing?
Compliancy. It's a huge one we're seeing. As MSPs are realizing how much more they're held, to compliance. Companies like Compliancy Group have done a great job of raising that awareness in the space. As they're raising that awareness, MSPs are now going back to their tools, and it's causing an upstream effect for all the vendors to take a look at themselves and say, how compliant am I for these MSPs? And then in turn, can I sign a BAA for them to be able to sign off that they're compliant down to the client? So that's happening more and more. Again, price is becoming a pretty hot topic one, just from a standpoint of that bubbling effect. When you start off and you had 3 tools, and now all of a sudden you have an RMM for network, you have an RMM for your core tools, you have 4 different types of security applications, which all do great and amazing things, but it does become a bit of platform fatigue.
No, fair enough. How important is it for inner industry kind of validation, right? Like, I know peer groups are very popular. Obviously, the social platforms are very popular. How often do you see MSPs actually getting behind the scenes from their peers in the industry to see how they're using tools, how they're working on a day-to-day basis before they pull the trigger?
I've actually started to see that more over the last few years, and it's a very cool thing with our industry. You'll see somebody say, "Hey, is anybody using bvoip?" And one of your partners will jump in and say, "Yep, I'm using it. If you want, we'll jump into Zoom and I'll show you the cool management platform." And that's just a really exciting part about our industry, right? Because like you said, everyone in this industry is a competitor to each other. And yes, they're geographically might be on opposite sides of the country and opposite sides of the world, but the fact that they're willing to jump into something that they may not know and offer that up is pretty cool. I'm seeing that more and more on, again, a lot of those social platforms.
Oh, very interesting. So do you think that largely a lot of the places where people are getting together to have these kind of on the fly conversations outside of cyberspace would have been in-person events, right? That's largely been the mechanism, right? That people learned about new stuff, learned how they were being used, figure out who was using what. And that's largely been gone this year. Do you feel like that's caused a challenge to figure out what's actually out there? Or has that really, from what people on the street are doing, has that really not made a difference?
No, I would say it's probably a huge challenge, especially to the smaller MSP. Somebody who maybe started in the last few years has been starting to grow. Um, One of the biggest things that's resided for years and years and years has always been the hallway chats. The hallway chats are the best part of the conference. The hallway chats are the place I get my info. I use this RMM because 5 years ago I was at this conference and I got this amazing script from an MSP in Louisiana, and now I'm on a tear with it, and it's helped me out with all my clients and saved me X amount of time. And you always hear those stories. So not having that, I think absolutely. But that's really that long term effect, right? It's the same conversation people have about kids going to school, keeping kids out of school. What's that going to do to this generation, right? This grade that missed potentially up to a year of actual in-person school. What happens there to those kids? What's the long-lasting effect? I think it's the same conversation here. What's the long-lasting effect to our industry for that generation of people right now who aren't getting that knowledge? Does it set them back a year? Does it set them back 2 years? Realistically, what does that do to them?
Let's go to the other side of the spectrum for a second, right? Let's talk about the MSP that's more mature. Maybe they've merged. Maybe they're starting to hit that, you said super MSP category. And now maybe they're starting to look at more enterprise type stuff. Like maybe it's a Salesforce, maybe it's a ServiceNow, maybe it's like one of these, platforms that's really coming down the stream, not necessarily going up, right? Like, at what point do those tools apply to this particular vertical?
Yeah, so funny enough, I've been seeing NetSuite a lot as one that is constantly coming downstream. The problem is the price hasn't come downstream, and when you look at a tool like that, you're talking not only hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the tool going, but I mean you're talking full-time employees to sit there and focus and constantly configure it. I mean those tools are amazing, but they're sandboxes. Every one of them, Salesforce, NetSuite, they're absolute sandboxes that need somebody in them constantly to orchestrate it. And if that person's not there, and that's a full-time employee, that's a six-figure full-time employee, and if that person's not there to keep it going, then it's not going to be as usable. It's not going to be any more usable than a tool that would have cost you $80 a user instead of $150 a user before you add in anything else from a services or anything else standpoint. So yeah, we're definitely seeing it more. I'm just seeing it more in the evaluation process, and it's quickly removed out. Again, those super MSPs, those people who are 5, 6, 7, 800, 900, you're seeing them evaluated a little more seriously. But I had a 24-person MSP the other day who evaluated it. And I just said to them, honestly, does this make financial sense? And they said, no, we don't think so. I think when you get over that probably 600-700 mark, probably makes a little more sense. But even there, it's still a huge investment.
So then let's talk about this angle then. The word integration has been used, abused, and split up in 5 different ways. I feel like there was a moment there in the industry where anybody would call anything an integration just to use the word integration when it really wasn't. But there are some legitimate connections out there, right? Like where tools actually work, in tandem very well. How is that not a challenge when you're looking at these suites outside of the space, because those ties don't exist, and now you're literally having to build it yourself?
Absolutely. So, you mentioned that beautiful integration, RMM PSA. That's the age-old peanut butter and jelly integration that everybody knows, everybody loves, everybody uses. Now, yeah, if you zoom out, I bet you a lot of the RMMs you use today probably don't go across that enterprise suite. And if they do, it's probably nowhere near the level it does with the MSP tools, because the MSP tools have been built, proprietarily for our industry, or were quickly adapted in early on in their life cycle to be for our industry, and have grown in that, in that direction. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a huge challenge. And I think even if the primary ones do it, you're going to be making a lot of concessions on the secondary ones that you love, right? Documentation was one that popped up a couple years ago and became huge, and everybody loves their documentation tools they picked and grew with. That's probably not there anymore. So I would really make sure that that's part of the process. Is this speaking to my tools? Are they investing in my space? Trade shows aren't there today, but they will be someday. We will be back on the road fully, and when it happens, are you seeing those names? Are they around? Are they supporting your industry? Are they on your industry podcast? Are they in your industry news? And is it for something more than this X partner was acquired? What's their level of interaction, and are they supporting the industry that you're thriving and growing in?
Sure. I'm starting to, like this really started kind of trickling up like a couple years ago, but as time has gone on, it seems like it's really starting to maybe, I'm not going to say fire behind it, but it's starting to get some warm temperature behind it, which is somebody internal of the MSP is quasi good at scripting or quasi good at coding, and they've come to a point where they're like, hey, maybe I'll switch to like a Power BI with Microsoft, or maybe I'll dump things into my own SQL server and start building out stuff rather than going to like a data warehousing type tool. And there's a few out there that we're all familiar with. Like, is that starting to pop up in your conversations? Like this whole, I don't know if DevOps is the right word, but like the ability for these guys to kind of make and mold their own things that don't maybe necessarily exist.
Yeah, we see this a lot. Hell, we used to see this in the phone, the phone world, right? People would make their own tool. I think with anything, before you go down that path, I would really encourage you to take the exercise and probably get with some industry, some really intelligent people we have out there in this industry to understand the full and long-term cost of this. You develop your own tool, what does it cost you today? And I would start by breaking it down to realistic hours of a dev. If you're not the dev, get the dev. Don't make that up on your own. Get the dev, understand from a reputable dev that is going to set a scope and a timeline, is going to meet it or come close to it, how many hours it's going to take. Now understand that hard cost. That's a huge one. That's the upfront. That's $750,000, it's $1 million, whatever it is. Because you're going to have to break that down by their hours and then against their salary. Now fast forward, that person's now a full-time employee. They work for you going forward because not only do they build it, they maintain it, they upgrade it. All the tools around you that you're going to want to integrate into are going to change or going to evolve over time. If you're pulling data in right now and you built integrations, well, when version 21.2 comes out, guess what? They all broke. So that dev is now spending the next month and a half fixing everything for potentially more of them to break in the following quarter. And that's going to happen. You have to think about that long term in any of your tools, and it's a constant battle. Understand that every one of our companies have an entire team of dev, an entire team of QA, making sure that these tools work and they work properly and they're continuously tested and they're continuously updated. So that's the long term of it, and that's what I really encourage. I'm seeing it, but I usually see it on the other end. We tried it, we built the tool, it worked for us for a while, it was good. We're starting to feel the pressure of it. Bob built it 10 years ago, and it's been great since, he started building in the 90s. We've been using it for 10 years, but yeah, it's starting to come loose. And we need to get into something new. We need to get into something that integrates. And, I want to take those people and say, did you do this exercise? Because what did it cost you in the end? And was it worth the 10 years of not paying for one of these other tools? I guarantee you it would have been cheaper.
Well, it's a good point because, people come and go, right? And if somebody took a project on internally and you start to rely on it and they're no longer there, do you have the resources in-house to figure it out? Did you get the source code before that person left? Can you get somebody else in there to really understand it in a reasonable period of time? All right. These are all questions that pop up, but it's definitely happening a little bit more, than it was a couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah, I think coding structures change. It's in some areas gotten a little bit easier. There's a little more automation to it. There's a little more guiding to it. You're not looking at blank code in a DOS window. you're doing a little more guided in the coding structures today, which is great, and it's helping us out in a lot of ways. I mean, we're seeing some incredible stuff coming out of the RMM world and some of the automation people are doing there. We have MSPs that are trying to tie tighter into our inventory module and pull in real-time pricing from other areas outside of Utilize. I mean, there's some really incredible stuff out there, but I think that's the better focus, right? How can you take your tools and build them to the next level? Maybe you, instead of building your own tool, if your big problem is that your PSA, right, doesn't do one thing, could you build that and then resell that as an integration, right? That's much more manageable than trying to build your entire full-fledged tool. So, I'd encourage that if you've got a whiz in house and somebody who's really great with code, try that exercise. And it'll give you an idea of what it takes to fully manage something like that, but it's also could be a great revenue stream. I mean, look at some of the enterprise tool integrations out there. Some of them are a couple $100 a month easily.
What are you seeing out of the? I mean, Microsoft's just big, man. I mean, we know who they are. They're the elephant in the room. I feel like when they have problems, and they have, the last couple of 6, 7, 8 weeks have been not so great because they've had problems across the board. But they're Microsoft, right? Nobody, it's like, all right, well, what are you going to do? They're the guy at the top of the food chain. But what are you hearing about connections to, the M365, the Office 365, like the Microsoft stack? Obviously, you heard, some announcements by the bigger guys, right, saying that they're starting to tie in somewhere. Is that really starting to become a real conversation, or is that still too early in your opinion?
No, I think it's happening. If you look at O365, it's the largest deployed mail system out there. It's the largest, deployed Office apps out there. So yeah, everyone, most of our clients are on that app. Most of our clients are using the full stack. And as MSPs, yeah, that's going to make your life easier if you tie more things into their tools. And that's why Active Directory forever has been a great integration to have when you boot up the new tools. Right, if you take a tool like bvoip and I've got to assign extensions to everybody, being able to just tie it into that O365 account, pull that all over, and then assign against that makes life 10 times easier than typing in every single employee's name, especially across the board for all my clients. So yeah, I think people are tying into it more. I think you're seeing some cool integrations pop up. But as with everything, just because they're huge doesn't mean they're perfect, right? I mean, you touched on it. There's been some issues lately. And that's something you got to watch out for. And you got to make sure, before you just blindly jump in, it's with anything, right? You don't buy the first generation of a car. You don't buy the first generation of a crazy new phone, right? Everyone that jumped on the foldable phone bandwagon is really upset after that first Galaxy phone. So watch it, make sure it works first, test it. That's your job as a technical advisor. You're not putting something untested into a client site.
It's funny that you say that. On the Channel Strong tour, I ran into a guy that is actually actively using the Surface Duo phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was purple. So I was like, wait a minute, what's that purple thing? And oh, wait a minute, is that a Microsoft phone? Wait, let's go check that out. So it was cool to see, like Gen 1 of that. The guy seemed to like it. I played with it for a little bit. I might wait for another one to come out before I really seriously consider it. But yeah, it's cool to see. It's cool to see the new toys, right? It's probably half the reason why a lot of us are in this industry.
And but you hit on a good reason there. I know you're a big Microsoft Surface book lover, right? You love the laptops. The first gen of that was not good. Battery life was horrible. They had that RT version where you couldn't really get any real apps on it. From what MSPs were actually giving out for workable laptops, it was unusable. But you fast forward 2 generations, that's hands down one of the easiest laptops to give out to people. People love them. They're portable, they're travelable. I kicked mine all over the world 6, 7, 8 times a year and never had an issue with it. Thing ticked like watch and never had a problem. You've been using the books for quite a while and they're powerhouses, they're great laptops, but again, it wasn't the first generation. And the first one generally had some issues. So, kind of back to that point, just as you're tying in more of these tools, as you're bringing it in, make sure you're really testing it. Make sure it's with anything, right? Version control.
Well, which brings me to the point, how much time should MSPs be devoting towards, I don't know if I call it R&D or just testing out new stuff, right? Like every vendor on the planet gives away some sort of proof of concept, test unit, test account, whatever. I feel like if it's owner led, right, and it's a smaller org, they get too locked up in the day to day. They don't even have a chance to really kick the tires well. How much time do you recommend, a quarter, a year, a month that people just, kick around with other ideas, right? New stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, couple things with this. I'd say first of all, again, it's your responsibility as a tech advisor to know the new technologies. You don't want to be sitting there when your client comes to you thinking, "This is my tech guy. I'm going to ask him because he knows all about computers and he'll know about these new smart home systems that I want to get. My smart garage door opener." Um, as you do more home stuff, that's going to become more applicable. So not that you have to install every smart home device in your home, but you should know them, be comfortable with them, understand the quirks, the issues, do the research before you offer to go and install them. If you're into it, yeah, probably a good idea to tweak around with them, play around with some of them. Now, furthermore, I would say from a larger distribution standpoint, phones are a great example, laptops. I would ask your distributors, especially if you're a bigger partner, you work with the distributors a lot, ask them to come in, try the different phones, play around with them. When the world opens back up, back in my time at bvoip, we used to work with a distributor called ADP down in Dallas, Texas. They have a great showroom. You can go right in there, you can pick up the phone, you can feel it. Does it feel cheap? Does it feel light? Well, my clients like this, will they hate it? I'd encourage you to do those exercises. I think it's your responsibility to keep doing that and stay up to date on those. You're not going to get it from a marketing flyer in your email that you're going to delete or send to spam anyway. So I would reserve time. I'd say maybe once a quarter. Technology moves fast, so don't sleep on it.
No, fair enough. And then, I mean, the other challenge then is now that you have all of these tools in place, and a lot of times people don't do that evaluation process until it's time for renewal time, right? And like 3 years of stuff or a year's worth of stuff has happened, right? And like features have come out, and like, what's the best, like, and we get it, right? The mailbox noise is there, right? The social media feed is there. I mean, what's the best way for people to stay up to date with their, on their vendors, on their tools, on their apps, right? It just seems like there's a lot going on, but if you're not paying attention for a while, you could miss some pretty big stuff.
Absolutely. I know one of the things that we do as a vendor, we distribute every new release. We'll distribute a list through our partner portal that shows each version and the added in features. To me, that's a quick reference guide. You know right away what's been added, what's been taken away, what's been tweaked. I'd look for one of those. Those are one for the guy who's tight on time. For everybody else, look for the webinars. Webinars are a great way to understand the new releases, what's going on. You may have to block out some time. I would encourage you not to wait for a renewal, but if you have, block out a day. Spend the day asking, calling those vendors, call your account manager, call your partner success manager, and ask them what's been the big difference, what's been the big change. I'm thinking about upgrading. I need to upgrade. Why should I upgrade? What has been, is it the iPhone? Is it exactly the same phone, or did they actually add some new stuff? Is the battery life better? What are the big changes this time that's going to make me want to do it? Or why am I still paying it? Why am I paying more? Why am I potentially paying more at renewal? Understand those things. That's all down to your responsibility. If you wait till the last minute, the person you're going to hurt is yourself.
Oh, good advice. So as we're kind of getting into the home stretch, right? Was talking to Jay-Z over at Channel Pro on the tour. Just came out for a few days. Tells me that he's already had vendors tell him that they're pretty much on lock until the end of 2021 now, right? We're not even talking about 2020. So what's your outlook for the rest of this year? What's your outlook for next year? Where do you think the industry goes over the next 18 months? And any advice that you would give out from to the MSPs out there?
I feel like this question is a whole other MSP initiative session, but I'll give it my best crack. Yeah, I think what he's hearing is probably from the large vendors, the HPs, the Dells, the Lenovo's, and yeah, absolutely. They have corporate policies. They have an army of lawyers the size of some of the companies in our space. So they are being told from a liability standpoint, they cannot put people on the road. They cannot go near that kind of stuff. And I understand it. I definitely do. I think people are being smart about it, for the most part, when they go out. Hell, I look at the tour you guys just did. You had masks, you had hand sanitizer, you took really good precautions. You were outside the entire time. You did everything right, and hopefully everyone's doing it that way. I don't think everyone is. I hope they are, but when you look forward, I think you've got to look at the fact that we're all playing with a crystal ball here. We don't know if a vaccine's coming out tomorrow through an emergency press conference, or if it's coming out in 2022. because of testing complications. We just don't know. We are operating on a complete and utter unknown. I would love to tell you that my crystal ball says we'll be back in the road in Q2. I think Q2, Q3 is probably realistic for next year. I think people are going to see what you guys are doing. I think people are going to see some of the good initiatives out there that are taking the right precautions and making a safe space for the partners to still get together and have those hallway chats at a socially distanced space with a mask on, but have those hallway chats again. And I hope to see them back sooner than later.
No, fair enough. Any words of advice, anything you suggest MSPs should do in this time? Like any of the things that you've heard are working that these people should look into?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of what I said earlier in the call, I first, don't be afraid to, spread out a little bit, try some new tools, look at these other industries that are still thriving really well. That managed security, some of those other ones that are doing extremely well, become the home automation expert. People are working their homes. I've never seen more people at a Home Depot my entire life than I have during the coronavirus, because people have nothing else to do. When you're stuck at home and you don't want to do anything, you create a project. Well, a lot of people are going to be looking to do stuff like this. So even if it's you're a distributor now for these smart home products, or you're an installer, whatever it is, become that expert. Own that space a little bit in your area, and who knows, that could be an entire line of revenue for you. So that would be the big one. Evaluate your tools, understand what you're paying for, understand what you're overpaying for, understand what you don't have, understand what your competitors are winning with. A lot of stuff that's worked before is still working now, but you got to take a different approach. And the final one is, don't be afraid of homework. I know we've all talked about it. It's scary. It's something we avoided in the past, because if I have an office to go to, but then I have to drive to 3 remote employees' houses, that's a mess. That's going to cause more truck time. We know truck time's a headache. But the bigger question is, you signed a managed contract. You said no matter what, you're going to take care of their IT. Well, now their IT is still there. It's still happening, but it's happening from a house. And are you any less reliable now for that, or liable for that? Or are you off the hook? I mean, depends on what your contract says, but I'm going to guess in many cases, people are still liable to go there and fix that, whether it's at a house or not. So, I think you got to you got to embrace it. You got to get ahead of it. You got to think about it from a contract language when these renewals come up. We're getting to the end of the year, and that's going to happen. And you have to make a plan for how you're going to tackle that next year if things don't change fast enough.
Oh, it's good advice. Alec, I know I'm sure you're itching to get on the road. I feel like you're a little bit landlocked, and from those couple 100,000 miles a year to going nowhere, I'm sure that's irking you a little bit is probably the right word. But I'm glad that you're I see your home bar is all nice and finished and ready to go. So hopefully you're enjoying that during the lockdown time here.
That was my Corona Home Depot project. Yeah. Went very well, but I literally just said to Sade I would get on a plane and fly anywhere right now. My governor would allow me to, but hopefully I'll be back on the road with you guys and everyone else sooner than later, and appreciate you having me on.
Well, maybe you can do what Australia does, where they get on a plane, fly in a loop, and come back right into the airport. Who knows?
I'm good right now.
How do people find you online, Alec? How do they get a hold of you, your company, all that jazz?
Absolutely. Always on LinkedIn. I'm in a lot of the social groups for Facebook, Reddit, but of course, tigerpaw.com, or Stanners at tigerpawsoftware.com.
All right. Appreciate you. Thanks everybody for watching. Please keep watching the MSP Initiative Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1:00 Eastern time. Every single session since March has been recorded. Don't feel afraid to go back and rewatch, rewind. This session will be up there, and we look forward to keep on putting some good information out into the world. Alex, stay in touch. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.